Well, it is. Yeah, why don't we start?
Hi, I'm Jenny Latout, and I'm the co-chair with Carlin Anderson of the Northern Virginia Affinity Group of AFP, and we're so happy that you're all here today for this panel that we put together with the Young Professionals Affinity Group. Lauren and Lauren did a lot of work here today putting this together, so why don't you introduce the panelists?
Yes, everyone. Hi, I'm Lauren Golubsky, and like I said before, Lauren Schmidt really did a lot of the lead work here, but we are co-chairs for the Young Professionals Affinity Group. So welcome to everyone, and thank you for partnering with us, Nova. Without further ado, I get to introduce the panelists, and I will start with Nathan Wells-Free. He's a human resource manager at Simplicity Corporation. Nathan has 5+ years working in human resources as a people connector and employee advocate. Nathan believes in actively giving back to his community and has had the privilege of serving a variety of committees through the Society of Human Resources and others. In his free time, he enjoys a good beer, grilling, and practicing martial arts. Welcome, Nathan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Next, we have Julie Price, who has her CFRE. She is a senior director of fundraising communications and impact communications. She develops fundraising strategies and creative content for a wide variety of nonprofit clients. She previously served on the development teams at National Women's Law Center and Cristo Rey Jesuit High School in Baltimore. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks, Lauren.
And lastly, we have Pam Becker, who is Executive Director of the Foundation for Rural Service, and also NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, if I'm saying that right, correct, Pam?
Yes, I'm not Executive Director of NTCA though.
Okay. Yes. Pam has worked 8 years in government relations for a professional association in the DC area. She moved to San Diego, where she started her development career. She worked for San Diego State University, the Salk Institute for Biological Studies, and Planned Parenthood of the Pacific Southwest, where she led the major gifts and special events team for 7 years. In 2017, Pam started the role as executive director at the Southwest Beacon for K9 Companions. Then in 2019, she relocated back to the DC area because becoming executive director of the Foundation for Rural Service, the philanthropic arm of NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association. Welcome to all of our panelists, and thank you everyone for being here. We're excited to create this platform and the space to talk about intentional relationship building. So I will pass this back over to Lauren Schmidt.
Great. So let's get started then. The first question that we wanted to ask our panelists is, just to start off, what would you say is the value of intentional relationship building in the workplace, and especially for relationship building among peers versus higher ups in the agency? And whoever wants to go first, just be my guest.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in on this one. So just generally speaking, like what the value is of building relationships in the workplace, a brief thought exercise on this one. If everybody could just take maybe 10, 15 seconds, just try to think about a time you were in an environment where you were new, you weren't very comfortable, you don't really know the people, and you're not really sure who's who and what's what. Just think about that for a few seconds. And then when you've kind of held that mental image, feel how that feels. Now, to kind of counter that, think about a time where you're stepping into an environment where you are very comfortable, you know everybody. Just walking in the room feels like walking into your favorite bar and everyone knows your name. You're walking onto the set of Cheers. Like everyone's really excited to have you there. Kind of hold on to that feeling for a second. And think about how is that going to impact you, and how is that going to show in your work and your actions and everything you do? Like, it's hard to understate the benefits of truly being comfortable in your environment. And that is the value of having intentional relationships with your coworkers. Like, it takes you from thinking at a lower level of like fear-based reaction to based motivation. And especially if you have that kind of relationship with your boss, you're more willing and bring new ideas. And especially as a boss, your employees are there giving you their best selves. They're not self-censoring. They're not hiding things that could be valuable. They're not quickly trying to cover for their own mistakes. Like, you get the best out of that person, and they can give you the best, and they want to give you the best. And to speak more to the topic of peers, in this environment, you can talk to your coworkers in a more high trust environment. You're able to break down those silos of information and just really share and connect with them, things that you might not know about. Like, for instance, does HR even know what marketing is doing? Can we brag about that? Can we help the manager with some of their upcoming staffing needs and say, hey, I heard you guys are doing some big projects. Do you want to maybe give some special recognition to your employees? Those types of things happen when you're talking more and you're comfortable with each other.
Julie, do you want to go next? Or do you want me to jump in?
Sure. That was great, Nathan. And I think that, you talked about trust, and that's so critical to, the foundation of any healthy relationship, inside or outside of the workplace. And I think especially over the past 18 months, we've all had to acknowledge that we are in the workplace, that we've had to acknowledge we're more than just our jobs. And that when you show up to work each day, whether it's in an actual office or at your dining room table, you're bringing your whole self. And that includes, your own personality and preferences and whatever joys or challenges you're dealing with outside of the office. And, we all need to acknowledge that, whether we're interacting with our peers or we're in a employee-employer relationship. And in order to have a relationship built on trust, you really need solid communication between people, because otherwise you aren't able to be on the same page to know what's going on, inside and outside of the workplace that may be impacting your work together. And that doesn't mean oversharing, but being able to, have that trust, and be on the same page. And if you have that trust established, then you are able to respect and welcome a diversity of opinions in any given conversation. You're able to give and receive candid feedback with kindness, and basically you're setting yourself up for success as a team.
What I would add to all of those things, which I agree with, ditto, is also the component about, as fundraisers, I think everybody thinks or assumes that we're just really like magical relationship builders. We know that doesn't happen, and that they're hard, and that you have to work on them. And so you have to pay attention to the relationships that you are building with your donors and your prospects and all of that. But then you also have to pay that same attention to the people that you work with and for. And for me as a fundraiser, if I have a really great relationship with a donor, it makes me better at my job. It makes me better at communicating. It makes me better at building that trust that Julie was just talking about. It's also just way more fun. I think it's, one of the things that actually I like about these Zoom meetings, as painful as they might be, is that I can see into your house. I see what you look like and what your life is like. And I know that you have a dog. And, yes, there are boundaries, and you have to figure out what you're comfortable with. But we were, before this all started, we were saying, yeah, it looks okay behind us. What you can't see is the chaos on the other side of the screen. And so, but we're all human. And I think it's a nice reminder that we are human, and that we need those relationships, and that I want to know what you're like as a regular person. And I want you to know what I'm like as a regular person. And I think that makes me better at doing my job. One of the things I don't know if it's good or bad, but I'm not always good at filtering. And I think that, you have to be authentic. And I think your coworkers know if you are being authentic, donors know if you are being authentic, and you just have to kind of embrace it and go for it. So I'm not sure I answered your question, Lauren, but we're off and running.
I think, you guys are doing swimmingly. Absolutely great. I guess the second question, though, since we'll just jump right on in, is what have you found personally to be the greatest obstacle for many in building relationships in the workplace?
I could jump off of something you just mentioned, Pam, which is boundaries. And I think that one of the trickiest things is finding that sweet spot between sharing enough of yourself that you do feel seen and understood by your colleagues, but not oversharing to the point that we're getting too much into the personal life. I think we've all worked with someone who's got a little bit of trouble on that particular piece.
Right.
But when you are able to find that balance, then you can get the support you need when things are not going as well outside of the office. I have 2 little children, and as everyone with kids over the past year has experienced, there have been days when I unexpectedly have everybody here with me, and I am very open about that with my colleagues, because we're all going to go through weeks that are difficult because of something going on outside of the office. And if we're open with one another about that, we can get the support we need at that moment so that we're in a better place to help our colleagues when they need that kind of support.
Yeah. I would say it also, for a relationship, for obstacles, it takes 2, right? Not everybody wants to have a relationship. And so you have to sort of go back to what Julie was figuring out. You have to figure out that balance about, I'm going to be nice and ask you questions. And after a while, if that person just isn't responding, that's okay. That's not about me. That's about them. And that's fine. I think it also, I have worked in places where reaching out, trying to find out, build that relationship can be threatening to some folks. And I think you have to have enough awareness or wherewithal to recognize that that person just isn't going to go there. And so that's okay, and move on. Nathan?
Definitely going to piggyback off that, Pam. I think there's a big piece of it is some people don't want that relationship. They want to have a very clear separation between personal and professional life. And that can be really hard. I would say that it's unfortunate that a lot of people, or some people, feel that way, because it makes you less approachable, honestly. And some of it is around role stigma. So it's like, if you're in leadership, people think, oh, I can't talk to them. What if I say something longer? Or what if they what if they go tell my boss that I said something stupid?
Yeah.
And especially, I mean, as an HR professional, I get a ton of this stigma. No, everybody's like, oh, so is HR spying on me? And like, no. I promise I'm not going to tell anybody that like you went out of town for the weekend with your friends. Like no one's getting in trouble for that. So I would say really breaking down stigma about who you can and can't talk to in the office and just in general in your organization is hugely important, because how else do you build those mentoring relationships if your employees are afraid to talk to your directors? That it just becomes this hard boundary where your employees are scared, and the directors are like, why aren't they doing what I need them to do? Why don't they understand what I'm trying to say? It leads to a lot of other issues. So definitely focusing on that, and just creating this space for people to kind of organically connect. Office events, kind of open forum discussions are great for that. So something my company is doing now that we're coming back from the pandemic, we're hosting these weekly happy hours on our rooftop. We're just providing, beer and wine for people. The executives come and just kind of chat with people and talk about what's going on in their world, and just kind of to help break down those barriers of just accessibility.
I would say in the past, one of the biggest obstacles was just geography, right? If you can only, it's easiest to be friends and build a relationship with people who are literally maybe in the office next door or on the same floor with you. One of the advantages of Zoom is now we don't have that obstacle, and you could meet anybody anywhere. I think it's a little riskier and you have to put yourself out there a little bit more, but in a way it's an advantage.
Agreed. No, despite Zoom and meeting fatigue, I definitely think it's been a huge boon that companies have started to use it more. and have accepted it as a part of everyday life, where I know in some organizations there was a lot of hesitancy around digital meeting places and remote work and things like that. So this is, for lack of a better phrase, a brave new world, and I'm excited for it. I think it's going to produce some really interesting results. Well, that's all.
All right, that was, sorry, I stepped out just a moment. That was the end of question 2, guys?
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
So question 3 is, what are some tips for building a personal brand within your agency?
So if the two of you don't
Go
mind,
ahead.
I will be talking on this one. Okay. So I actually put a fair amount of thought into this one. For me, there is, especially for people who are more early on in their careers, there's definitely what I would consider a 3-step process. First, you really have to know yourself. What is your brand? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What do you bring to the table? And basically asking yourself what you're good at and how you can help other people. Because that is how you develop your brand, which is the second point. Once you know that and you know what you can offer, bringing that forward, just having those casual conversations and saying, yeah, I'm really interested in this topic. I've been doing some research and work on this. You know, if you have anything that kind of falls in this domain, I would love to help you out on it. I'm really excited about it, and I think it'd be a great value add. And just kind of keep doing that for a little bit. You'll be amazed at how many things start flying across your desk. It adds up really fast. And it's really amazing to see just the energy that you put out comes back to you tenfold. And then, of course, lastly, now that you've got this huge stack of things to do on your desk because you're super excited about it, what are you going to do? So I would say the big thing here is, especially early on when you're still building that and you're just taking every project you can get and you're not quite ready to be selective, is just really try to over deliver. Try to take the 1 or 2 trust building projects that you get from people and just knock them out of the park. Really put your energy into it and show that you're serious about it and passionate about it. And kind of moving from there, at that point, word of mouth becomes your most powerful ally. Like, you've already set the intention, you've got the work, and you've really put your heart and soul into the work. And the rest kind of takes off from there.
I must be showing my age because I don't think of it as having a brand. I mean, and maybe that's what it's called these days. You know, I would just call it sort of, what are you known for? What are you good at? What are you not so good at? And everything that Nathan said, I agree with. I think there's also an element of, you guys know that, only know it as social media, but there's a social media site about Because I Said I Would. Which is, if you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it, and you make that commitment and you make that promise. And I think staying true to that is really important. And it's exactly what Nathan just said. If you say you want to help with a project, then help with a project and be useful. Don't just sit there and be part of that meeting. So,
And then I would add that when you succeed at that project, don't be afraid to accept credit for your role in it. I think that a lot of us struggle with, wanting to deflect. Well, I didn't do that by myself. I had a lot of people working together, and you can be recognizing and lifting up everybody's contributions without, downplaying your own. I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, and that's important too.
That's a great point. I'm really glad you said it. There's definitely a difference between being humble and being scared to talk about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent distinction.
but also back to what you were saying, Nathan, it's okay to say, hey, I want to be involved in this project. And that's not being pushy. That's okay. And in fact, probably whoever you're saying that to is going to be like, oh, yes, excellent, terrific. Love to have you.
Yes. And in my experience, if a director feels like there are too many hands in the kitchen, they will tell you.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. Hearing no sometimes is totally okay.
Yep.
Doesn't mean they hate you. They're not mad at you. It's just this isn't the right project for you right now. And that's totally understandable.
Yeah.
Right. So fourth question, in the context now of the virtual workplace, how has relationship building changed? I guess that's a little bit obvious. And what advice can you give for navigating that new environment?
I could start. I think that one thing we found really helpful on our team is just having standing times to check in on, not just, is this project moving? What did you do? What am I doing? But like, how are we? Let's like pause and take a moment to say, how are you doing on workload? And how are you doing in general in life? Our team actually we're a small company, so we have 9 folks on the team. And even before COVID, we have a standing weekly staff meeting, and we always open that with half an hour to just have everybody go around and share a little bit about how they're doing. And if they don't want to share, that's okay too. But that's where you're going to find out the fun things people did over the weekend, things they're looking forward to, the things they struggled with over the past week that may be impacting how they're able to show up in the workplace. And then we also have standing check-ins with our, employee supervisor relationships, and those don't always happen, but it's just good to have that on the calendar reminder. Like, I know none of us want to have extra Zoom meetings or extra meetings in general, but having that time held can be really helpful for, as things come up over the course of the week, you can kind of bank those for a later conversation without feeling like you're totally punting something further down. So I think having those moments built into your week to touch base are really helpful.
I would also say, pick up the phone and make a phone call. I feel like these days, it's so easy to just send an email or a chat or a text. I mean, we have all these different ways of communicating. Just pick up the phone. It works as a phone too. It really does. And, even I forget that sometimes. And I just feel like at the end of that kind of conversation, it's a much more meaningful conversation.
Agreed. So I actually, when I think about this, I think of it in different levels. So there's the first level, which is the structural level. This is what type of artifacts and institutions that your org has in place. So that can be things like Slack or Teams or Asana or whatever it is that you're working with, your framework. Those types of things actually set your baseline and basically help everyone understand what the shared space is. Without any of those things, it becomes a lot more difficult. It becomes a one-on-one, I have to talk to you, and then I have to talk to you, and then I have to talk to you, versus this more shared space that we can all kind of work together and move around. So kind of basically building a foundation and a space for your employees to interact with each other is definitely a top priority. And I think it's something that we're going to see a lot more of moving forward. I know in my organization, we use Slack, we use Teams already. I personally use Trello with my boss, so it's kind of a collaborative. She can just throw something on the board and say, hey, we're going to chat about this later. New project coming down the pipe, or she can check on my progress and then ping me on Slack and say, hey, thanks for doing that. So it's kind of just about those types of things. I will also say, just moving more to a virtual platform, if you don't have that kind of existing infrastructure, it really becomes about creating dedicated times for people to share. Like as we're talking about, just that casual conversation with your coworkers, especially coming from leadership. Having set the intention that it is okay to spend 10 or 15 minutes just talking about yourself and what's going on in your life. It's not wasted time. We're not watching the clock. It's about sharing and bonding with your coworkers so that you can ultimately be more productive and more comfortable sharing your ideas.
All right, and that brings us to the last formal planned question, which is what tips or suggestions you guys have for cultivating some sort of mentorship relationship in the workplace?
I think Julie should start.
Okay.
That's the official mentor.
Oh, very official. Well, on the sort of informal mentorship front, I think one thing that is generally true is that people enjoy giving advice. They like to share their opinions. So if you are interested in establishing a relationship with someone that has sort of a mentorship feel to it, I think that can be a really helpful place to start, is just if you've got something you want to pick their brain about and approach them for that. Yes, people are busy and sometimes it's not going to be the right moment. And you may have to do it later, but people do like offering their opinions. So that can be a great place to start with folks within your organization. That being said, having mentors outside of your immediate circle of colleagues can be really, really helpful for a wide variety of reasons, including that sometimes you're dealing with something really tricky that involves internal politics or a difficult colleague relationship, and having someone who's more removed from that situation can be really helpful to have somebody to bounce ideas off of. So I do want to make sure to shout out the AFPDC mentorship program, because I have benefited as a mentee back when I was in the Baltimore chapter, and now I'm acting as a mentor, and I've found it really fun and fulfilling. And I think that I will post the link in the chat for anybody who's interested in getting involved with that. But they've established sort of a cohort setup, so you do get to also interact with peers and get to know them through that process. So, yeah.
And I would just widen that about the mentorship program is fabulous and wonderful, but and if you're here on this session, you're already steps ahead of a lot of other folks, but just being involved, and this is not an ad, but it is, organizations like AFP, you're going to meet other people and getting involved. And, if you met somebody at something, send them a quick email about, hey, it was great to meet you. Or, if somebody said something along the way and you have, other questions, I think if it's somebody, we are all here because we are interested in this topic and we want to talk about it, and that will go on beyond 1 o'clock. So, take advantage of that and use those resources.
Definitely. I would say that building a mentor-mentee relationship is very similar to building a friendship. Like, it starts with one person just going ever slightly out of their way to set an intention and say, hey, I would like to interact with you more than just walking past you in the hallway and saying hello. And you slowly build over time. It doesn't have to be a formal conversation, but it can be. You can just say, hey, you want to grab coffee for 15, 20 minutes? I heard you were working on this really interesting project. And I was just curious to kind of pick your brain about it. Just start small and you can build from there. I will also say, from a manager perspective, until you reach a point like where you're very high up in the organization and you are hiring people to be subject matter experts to advise you, such as a CEO type position, your job is to be a mentor to your employees. As a director and as a manager, you want them to be better and give you higher value service, then you have to build them up. You have to share news articles with them, or spend 5 or 10 minutes just reviewing a project with them that you assign them and saying, okay, here's what I liked, here's where we could work on this a little more, and kind of taking that time and setting that attention to help them be better at it. It is self-serving, but it also very much helps them in their career, and it definitely builds trust. And I know I talked about this a lot earlier, but being in a high trust environment is like the number one thing you can do to create a high performing organization, in my opinion.
100%.
I know that I work with colleagues who are younger than me and who report to me. And so I often, unfortunately, sometimes come across as being mothering. And so we kind of have to be like, they have to trust me enough to say, that's enough, I get it. And I'll be like, okay, I can move on. So it's mentoring relationships can be tricky, and the trust part that Nathan is talking about is super important. Because you don't need another mother. They don't need another mother.
Well, do we want to now open it up to questions from everyone who's attended? If anybody does have a question, I know we have at least one question. Emily, did you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hi. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I wanted to specifically ask something about, Nathan, you touched on stigma in terms of your role as a human resources staff member, and I'm on the development team for a nonprofit, and there's actually stigma specifically, without like giving too many details away, involved with like a boss and a teammate, like that isn't great. Like the attitude is just like, I mean, they're fundraisers, and so that's their goal for the organization. So they're not as like, in terms of relationship building, as good as like my teammate and I. So what I'm mostly dealing with is like stigma with that other people don't want to deal with that half of the team. And so,
Okay.
it's not necessarily, like my other teammate and I have worked really hard to kind of like stick out our noses and kind of like defy the stigma that's associated with the team as a whole because of those two teammates. But how would you sort of advise, like in terms of continuing to build relationships with other people in the center and kind of like disassociating myself with that without seeming like we're not a unit together?
So this question actually has a couple of different things going on in different stratospheres. So
Yeah.
over on this side, there's a personnel issue, and there's an HR issue, and there's a brand issue, and over here there is your specific team, your credibility on the team, and you want out of this. So I would say, at the end of the day, you're trying to have your cake and eat it too. So what's more important to you? Appearing like a coherent, cohesive team of developers, or building a strong personal brand and being known as the person who can kind of get things done and make things happen?
Yeah.
I would say you really have to prioritize one over the other, and focusing on really maximizing your brand and offering the best possible service that you can would be the best approach for you. At the end of the day, if people are responsible for their own reputation to a certain extent, and if that side of the team is kind of holding back the entire department's reputation, then definitely do your part to distinguish yourself so that people can go, it's not that the team is an issue, is that there are these rock stars that I want to work with on the team. And that's a good thing for you. You'll find a lot of new opportunities in that space by doing that.
Okay.
And I will say it's very unfortunate that there are people who are kind of dragging down the credibility, but that's not a problem that you alone can solve.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I'm kind of definitely related to all of your points about building your own brand and reputation and like letting people see what you're known for and what you're good at, because I think that's what is definitely setting me apart from the rest of our team. So I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
And I suspect that other people in the organization see what's going on. I mean,
yeah,
sounds like you're already outshining for the right reasons.
Thank you.
Excellent. No, that was a really good question. I appreciate you asking it and kind of sharing that detail. I know it's not always easy to talk about those kind of problems, but it definitely keeps us on our toes as HR people and as mentors too, just writ large. So you're asking the right questions. Keep digging on keep pulling on this thread.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a question that kind of relates to this too. My question would be, you talk about like presenting your whole self to the workforce, and bringing, I think Zoom, definitely seeing what's going on in the background, kind of, bringing that lens a little bit to the virtual world. But I think My question would be, how do you kind of build a culture and start building a culture where that is actually becomes part of the norm if you're the one that's at the forefront, kind of like taking that initiative?
So is this for anyone in particular or all of us?
Go with all of us.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. No, I don't. I certainly don't want to suck up all the air in the room. I'm happy to give just a quick.
No, but I think your HR perspective is really helpful.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I would say if you're spearheading the initiative, you like, I would need a little bit more context. Like, do you have stakeholders? Do you have partners? Do you have executive buy-in on this? Because all of these things are what's going to give you those results that you're looking for. You can be the project manager spearheading this effort to really bring your whole self and create a collaborative space. But at the end of the day, people are going to look, the average employee is going to look to their boss and look to their leadership structure and go, I'm not going to put myself out there if they're not putting themselves out there, because I don't feel comfortable. I'm scared. What if I do something wrong? Like, I'm not doing what my boss is doing, and I want to be like my boss. Like, if you have a good relationship, you want to be like your boss. So getting your leaders to jump in and say jump in head first and say, hey, Lauren's doing this thing. We're super excited about it. We're going to be jumping in head first. Like, we're 100% behind her all the way. That will really give you a lot of momentum. And especially if you're trying to break down those barriers of low trust, that will kick off the process. But you do have to just kind of, after you break down that first barrier, you have to be consistent and reinforce it over and over again, because eventually it takes time. It takes time for people to trust you. And eventually you will reach that level of high trust, and it will just become an automatic reaction.
I'm not sure I understood your question. Are you saying, I want to be a leader, I want to go out and do something, be involved in something, but nobody will follow me? Or is it
more so like building a culture within the workforce that does not have a culture?
I see. I mean, maybe a place to start is in things that seem lower risk to other folks. You know, maybe it's not a big business related thing, but maybe it's it's a social event or something, or a way, an acknowledgement celebration or something like that doesn't feel as scary. I don't know, without knowing the situation. Yeah, it's hard to tell.
I do think it is one of those places where it's really important to get leadership to model this behavior, because I think, you're right, Lauren, that it's really hard to get folks to share if they're, not seeing that model from above. But that being said, I think there are probably things you could do within your own, immediate circle, immediate team, to sort of start there. And if you've got folks in leadership who are open to hearing, why it's important to establish more authentic relationships and give people room to bring their whole selves to work, then, having those conversations so that eventually you will get somebody at the top who is modeling this.
Thank you. That's super helpful.
I have a question from Regina, who is not able to use her camera and ask live, but she wants to know, do you have any tips for building relationships with coworkers who are protective of things like their email inboxes, chat streams, meeting time, etc., as some folks express strict preferences about keeping those communications all business? So how can you build a relationship with them in a virtual workplace with that sort of dynamic?
Really good question. That's a really good question. And I think it'll depend on sort of what tools you have available to you. I know that one way that we have sort of in the virtual space been able to have sort of more of those just fun personal interactions is by having some designated Slack channels that are just for like pet photos, or like the random link that you thought was fun and you wanted to share with everybody, but they're in one spot. So you're not encroaching on people's, work conversations if they are feeling like they need to stay focused, but you are making space for those conversations to happen in a sort of parallel stream.
Agreed. I think you create the intention. I'm a huge fan of using analogies, and an analogy I'll use here is that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force him to drink. So if you create the stage, you build the infrastructure, you set the culture, you set the intention, you've done everything you can. You've already put that out there. You've given people a space to feel comfortable. If some people simply choose to not engage and just never break down that barrier between professional and personal, there's only so much you can do. And you can hope that will chip away over time, but you can't win everyone over all the time.
Yeah.
And when you
I
do
don't have anything to add.
Yeah, I think when you do share yourself, then you do, over time that can you're leaving the door open for some reciprocity there. So yeah, but as Nathan said, there's only so much you can do sometimes.
All right, any other questions?
I have a question for Nathan.
Sure.
I'm wondering.
I'm so popular today.
Well, you've got good input. Back to mentorships and that kind of thing. Does your company have an official mentorship program or new hire orientation, or do you buddy people up, or do you have an official structure for creating those kinds of resources?
Sure. So yes and no. We're international, so we have a little more of that infrastructure built up in our Brazil office. But that is specifically, it's a very different cultural dynamic, right? You have to think of Brazil, in my experience with the corporate side of Brazil, Brazilian culture heavily revolves around relationships. It's everything. Every morning, like the office of like 30 people, they'll all just like hang out and have coffee for like an hour and a half and just talk. And that's very normal. So everything centers around relationships and mentorship and things like that. Here in the US office, we did have a buddy program for a little bit. And that was helpful for some new hires. And we also do a lot of informal mentorship. We definitely, as the HR team, we support our managers in that effort. If we talk to them and say if they have a teammate or a team member who is interested in learning more, we kind of coach them on that and say, here's what this person's asking for. We're that language translator who helped them understand the gap between what someone says and what they're asking, so to speak. So it does happen in a more informal capacity. So thank you for asking.
Well, I think that's one of the advantages of working in a large office. If you're in a smaller space, that's
Definitely. And we're fortunate enough to have we're hybrid, so we're partially remote and partially in person, and we have about 60 or 70 people who come physically in office, and then the other 100 some odd people are dedicated remote people. So to create some interesting dynamics, and you kind of have to dig in and pick some of the directors' brains a little bit and say, okay, what's going on in your org? Who are your people? Who are your high performers? What areas do you think your team could grow in? And really, it's just about kind of prompting people to start thinking about these types of things, especially if you're a specialist, if you're like a functional specialist who eventually moves into a management position. You don't necessarily think about people the same way your HR team or your executive leaders might think about people. Think about product and timelines and delivery. But you have to motivate people to make the product for you. You can't just sit there and go, I will grind this out. You have to motivate someone else to grind it out with you and for you.
I have a question. Hopefully you can hear me okay. What would you recommend for a situation in which you're managing up, but obviously managing up is always really hard, right? How do you manage relationships in that way where, say, someone is your supervisor, but they are like not doing what they need to be doing, for example?
I think managing up is really important, and people don't realize that it's work, but that it's valuable work and that it doesn't happen accidentally. So that's a huge point. So good job. It's an important skill to learn how to do.
I think one suggestion would be that when you are having to have some of these tough conversations where the people above you are not following through, coming to them with solutions to help solve the challenge for them. So you can acknowledge the problem, but you're framing it in the context of bringing them a way to solve the problem. Maybe it's a new system or a new structure for your work together that will make things go more smoothly. But I think it tends to be better received if you're not just complaining, but you're coming with some ideas on how to solve it.
Agreed. And to piggyback on that, coming up with specific ideas and specific suggestions, saying, I would like to be brought into meetings on X, Y, and Z topics, or saying, I'm interested in learning more about this. Would you please share with me some information, some articles, some journals that you follow or read on this topic? Things like that. Or saying, hey, could we spend 20 minutes, half an hour just kind of talking about just kind of organizational structure and things, and help me understand who the different players in the organization are. Going into it with a plan of your own. I know it's hard to know what to ask for sometimes, but if you can find somebody to kind of give you an outside perspective on what to ask for, going to your manager or your boss and saying, here's the things that I think would be valuable. Could we spend some time on them? Will go a long way. Because not everyone's a natural leader, not everyone's a natural manager, and they may not even know that you're missing this, or they may not be sure how to give that to you. They may think sending you a URL once a week qualifies as mentorship. And to you that might be, but I think being as specific as possible goes a long way.
I also think that it's not a, you would hope that, like, when I can tell when the people that I work with are managing up to me, and I'm always like, oh, okay. I'm grateful. I'm like, oh, okay, awesome. Thank you. Yes, let's do it like that. So don't be afraid that somebody's going to take it personally. I would hope that they, in fact, are grateful that you're trying to improve the situation.
Yeah.
Excellent.
All right. Do we have any more questions from the audience?
What does the young professionals group do about sort of buddying and mentoring and all that? Do you have a tie-in to the mentor program, an official tie-in?
Other Lauren, do you want to speak to this? I think you know more about it.
Sure. So I actually ended up starting with the mentoring program, and this is how I ended up as chair, chair for this group. So yeah, a lot of our organization, we do try to get as many mentors as possible, or matched with mentees of our committee, just because it honestly like aligns a lot. And then I think Jennifer Bra, I don't know how to say her last name. Jennifer B is the chair. And so like at the beginning of the year, we were able to really partner with her and figure out who was interested in the mentor-mentee program and make sure that those connections were made. So it's on a yearly basis, but we have had other people come in that are interested and really want to dive in, especially people start jobs different times of the year. So just being able to really partner and see if there's any other, cohorts that are available. And sometimes, people drop or leave the fundraising field. So there's just a lot of variables, but definitely making sure that people are connected as well as they would like to be. I think the mentor and mentee program has really helped. in my role too, and I know Julie has spoke highly of it. So it's a very good process to kind of join in, and AFP has a lot of resources. So that is kind of like the forefront of it, especially as you're, you know, a young professional or emerging professional in the fundraising community. It's just having those resources at the forefront and learning what AFP has to offer.
So I actually have a question for my fellow panelists here, and something that I will answer as well. Just kind of to recap for everybody who's watching, broad strokes, what is the biggest takeaway that you can kind of share from your experiences about intentional relationship building?
I was kind of thinking about that, or like, what would I do differently? It's just kind of the flip side of that same question. I think having confidence in yourself and being brave to ask those questions of people who might seem scary or off limits or too high up or whatever, sort of having confidence in yourself, and that showing that curiosity serves you well. I think also there are people who I now realize were mentors who at the time I didn't see them that way. But now looking back, I'm like, oh, I learned a ton from her. And so, you know, not burning bridges, going back, staying in touch with people after you move on to other jobs, all of that kind of just puts it in your karma pot of good relationships, and you take it with you wherever you go. That's what it is for me. Being brave, having confidence, and saying thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I think just adding on to the being brave part, Pam, just sort of being willing to be open yourself, because other people don't want to share with you if you're not also being forthcoming. So I think trying to cultivate that openness in yourself, even if you are naturally a bit more on the shy or keeping things closed up side. And I love what you said about, like, sometimes you have mentors and you don't realize it at the time. So I think, sort of thinking about the people in your life, either in the past or now, who are providing some really great insights, who you may be, as much as I appreciate the formal AFP mentorship program, there are a lot of mentors out there who aren't even doing it on purpose. They just, care and want you to succeed, and being able to identify and thank those folks is wonderful.
Excellent. Just to kind of give my last 2 cents on this topic, and thank you both for answering answers. You stole some of the best ones off the table. I love it.
Sorry.
No, honestly, it's great. You brought up some really great points I'm glad we could share these with everybody. I think for me, kind of the biggest takeaway overall is understand the environment that you're in. Is it high trust? Is it low trust? Is it medium trust? And then take calculated risks based on your environment. And also hold your leaders accountable. Like, if you're in a position to influence leaders, tell them that this is important. Talk about it. Share why it's important. Share how it's can directly affect outcomes, and it can affect morale. And I can list off all the HR things in a bullet point list, but the point is, if you want to have happy, productive, trustworthy employees, like, build that intention, put that out there, and try and be your best self for them, and give your employees the space to do the same.
And be happy and trustworthy yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I mean, being happy is a tall order. I understand, but
be civil, be cheerful.
but trust is something that is very much within your control every day.
Yep. Make it sound so easy. Ha! It takes practice. I think that's the other thing. It doesn't happen overnight.
Mm-hmm.
You have to stay after.
To cut us short, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We have just like 1 minute left. of the panel. I want to thank all the panelists. I think you provided some really great insights for everybody. I know provided some for myself. So thank you all very much for participating, and thanks everybody who came. And for those of you who participated, just lots of appreciation. So
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Go do great things.
Thank you, everyone.
bye.
Bye.
Thank you all. It was great.